On the afternoon of July 19, 2018, at 4:02 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the National Weather Service in Des Moines, Iowa, issued a tornado warning for Marshall County. The storm had already been tracked for several minutes, moving east-northeast at approximately 45 miles per hour. Radar showed a pronounced hook echo, a classic signature of a rotating thunderstorm approaching the city of Marshalltown. At 4:08 p.m., a tornado was confirmed on the ground by a trained spotter located 3 miles southwest of the city. The warning urged immediate shelter. There was no time to waste. At 4:11 p.m., the tornado entered the southern edge of Marshalltown. The sound was described by witnesses as a continuous roar, like a freight train but deeper and more violent. The storm had intensified rapidly in the final minutes before impact. It was rated an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with estimated peak winds of 144 miles per hour. The damage path stretched for nearly 9 miles. In Marshalltown, it was not a glancing blow. It drove directly through the heart of the city. What happened in the next 7 minutes permanently changed the landscape of a town that had stood for over 150 years. The tornado struck the historic Courthouse Square, the center of Marshalltown, at 4:12 p.m. The Marshall County Courthouse, a limestone building completed in 1886, suffered catastrophic damage. Its iconic clock tower, which had stood for over a century, was twisted and partially collapsed. Large sections of the roof were torn away. Windows shattered. Debris was thrown into the surrounding streets. The courthouse was not the only landmark hit. The nearby Orpheum Theater, a historic venue built in the early 20th century, lost its roof and suffered extensive structural damage. A row of brick storefronts along Main Street had their facades blown outward. Cars were flipped, trees were uprooted, power lines snapped and arced across wet pavement. At 4:14 p.m., the tornado moved into residential neighborhoods. Homes were leveled. Some were swept clean from their foundations. In the hardest-hit blocks, only the basements remained. Families who had taken shelter in those basements could hear the roar, feel the building shake, and then feel the pressure drop as the roof was pulled upward. When they emerged, entire streets were unrecognizable. The piles of debris were layered with splintered wood, insulation, personal belongings, and pieces of other people's houses. At 4:17 p.m., the tornado exited the city limits. It continued east for several more miles before lifting near the town of LeGrand. The entire duration of the tornado on the ground in Marshalltown was approximately 6 minutes. In that time, over 400 buildings were damaged or destroyed. 1 person was killed, 22 others were injured. The single fatality was a 67-year-old man who was sheltering in his home when the tornado collapsed the structure around him. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. They found a city in chaos. Roads were blocked by debris. Gas leaks were reported. The hospital, though not directly hit, prepared for an influx of casualties. The National Guard was activated. How could a tornado cause so much destruction in such a short time? The answer lies in the combination of storm intensity, urban density, and the structure of the built environment. EF3 tornadoes have winds between 136 and 165 miles per hour. These winds can tear roofs off well-constructed houses, destroy mobile homes, and snap large trees. In Marshalltown, many of the buildings that suffered the most damage were older masonry structures. Brick and mortar are strong against vertical loads but weak against lateral forces. The violent twisting of the tornado's wind shear exerted pressure that these buildings were never designed to withstand. The courthouse, with its large open interior spaces and tall bell tower, acted like a sail. The tower caught the wind and transferred the force downward, fracturing the stone walls. Investigators from the National Weather Service surveyed the damage the next day. They used a combination of ground surveys and drone imagery to map the path and assign an intensity rating. The evidence was consistent. Debris patterns showed convergence, indicating a strong mesocyclone. Trees were debarked on one side. Vehicles were moved significant distances. An 18-wheel semi-truck was flipped onto its side. The damage indicators were clear, but the technical assessment only tells part of the story. The real question is why the warning system did not prevent any deaths. It did issue a warning. The lead time was approximately 10 minutes from the first confirmation of the tornado to its impact. That is considered adequate by meteorological standards, yet 1 person died and over 20 were injured. What failed? The National Weather Service warning was broadcast over NOAA weather radios, local television, and mobile phone alerts. Most residents in the path received the warning. But in a tornado, the warning is only as good as the shelter available. In older homes without basements or in mobile homes, there is no safe place. The victim who died was in a single-story house. The structure collapsed on him. He was doing what he was supposed to do. He went to the interior of the home, away from windows. But the building could not withstand the force. The broader question involves building codes. Iowa does not have statewide mandatory tornado-safe room requirements. Many homes in the Midwest are built without reinforced storm shelters. The cost of retrofitting is prohibitive for many families. The system relies on warnings and individual preparedness. That works for many but not all. After the tornado, the city of Marshalltown faced a recovery that would take years. The courthouse alone cost over $30 million to restore. The Orpheum Theater required extensive reconstruction. Hundreds of families were displaced. Federal disaster assistance was approved. Temporary housing was set up. The community organized cleanup efforts. Volunteers came from neighboring towns, but the scars remained. The event still matters because it is a case study in how a well-worn tornado can still devastate a community. It raises questions about infrastructure resilience, the limits of forecasting, and the social factors that determine who survives. It also highlights the importance of building codes and affordable shelter. In the years since the Marshalltown tornado, some communities have reconsidered their preparedness plans. But for those who lived through it, the memory of that 6-minute assault is permanent. The investigation by the National Weather Service and local emergency management documented the timeline with precision. The warning was issued at 4:02 p.m., the tornado touched down at 4:08 p.m., it entered Marshalltown at 4:11 p.m., it exited at 4:17 p.m. By 4:30 p.m., first responders were already searching damaged buildings. By 5 p.m., the scope of the destruction was clear. By nightfall, the city was under curfew. The next morning, the assessment began. What was missing? A single safe room in the victim's home might have saved his life. A more robust building code for the courthouse could have reduced the damage. Better public education about the need for storm shelters could have encouraged more families to invest in protection. These are the questions that investigators and policymakers continue to ask. The answers are not simple. The Marshalltown tornado of 2018 was not the strongest storm to hit Iowa. It was not the widest or the longest-lived, but it struck a historic city with a concentrated population and a vulnerable building stock. The damage was severe, the recovery was long, the lessons are still being applied. This is the opening of the story. In the segments that follow, we will examine the meteorological setup, the personal accounts of those who lived through it, the emergency response, the recovery process, and the larger implications for tornado preparedness in the United States. We will also explore how a community rebuilds when the center of its identity is torn apart in minutes. The timeline is set, the scene is established, the questions remain open. The meteorological setup for the July 19th outbreak began days earlier, when a persistent ridge of high pressure over the southern plains pushed warm, moist air northward into the Midwest. By the morning of July 19th, surface dew points across central Iowa had climbed into the mid-70s. That moisture, combined with daytime heating and a strong upper-level jet stream approaching from the west, created an environment primed for severe thunderstorms. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a moderate risk for severe weather across much of Iowa, including a 15% chance of tornadoes within 25 miles of any point in the region. That forecast was accurate, but it remained a probability, not a certainty. At 11 a.m. Central Daylight Time, the first batch of storms began to develop along a dry line pushing eastward from the Missouri River. These storms were discrete, meaning they did not merge into a solid line. Each supercell had the potential to rotate. By 1 p.m., radar indicated strong rotation in a storm southwest of Des Moines. The National Weather Service office in Des Moines issued a tornado warning for that cell. It produced a brief tornado near the town of Indianola, damaging a few outbuildings but causing no injuries. That warning provided an early test of the alert system. Most residents received the alert, but many later reported that they did not take it seriously because they had heard warnings before with no impact. At 2:30 p.m., a second supercell developed over southwestern Iowa. This storm followed a similar track to the earlier one, moving northeast at approximately 40 miles per hour. The rotation signature on radar intensified rapidly. At 3:15 p.m., the storm crossed into Marshall County. Meteorologists at the Des Moines office noted a pronounced hook echo on reflectivity, a classic sign of a mesocyclone capable of producing a tornado. They issued a severe thunderstorm warning first, then upgraded to a tornado warning at 3:28 p.m. The warning stated, in part, that a confirmed tornado was likely based on radar indications and spotter reports. But no spotter had actually seen a funnel yet. At 3:45 p.m., a trained storm spotter near the town of Melbourne, about 15 miles southwest of Marshalltown, reported a wall cloud with rapid rotation. At 3:52 p.m., the same spotter reported a funnel cloud. The tornado warning was updated to include the specific location. At 4:02 p.m., the warning was reissued with the statement that a tornado was on the ground near the intersection of Highway 30 and County Road Essex 6. That report came from a different spotter, a farmer who watched from his barn as the tornado touched down in an open field. He later described the sound as a freight train, but that description is so common in tornado accounts that it had become a cliché. In his case, it was accurate. What happened between that confirmation and the tornado's entry into Marshalltown is a matter of seconds and decisions. The tornado was moving at 40 miles per hour. That gave residents in its path roughly 6 to 8 minutes of lead time after the warning. The National Weather Service had issued the warning 10 minutes before impact. That is within the standard goal of a 10 to 15-minute lead time. But the warning was only as effective as the systems that delivered it and the people who heard it. At 4:05 p.m., the outdoor warning sirens in Marshalltown began to sound. The city had tested them earlier that morning, as it did every first and third Thursday of the month at 10 a.m. Some residents later said they initially ignored the sirens because they assumed it was a test, even though the test was scheduled for morning. Others checked their phones. The wireless emergency alert system sent a text to all mobile phones within the warned area, but not every phone received it. Some older models did not support the alert. Some phones were on silent. Some people had their devices turned off or were in parts of buildings with poor reception. At 4:08 p.m., the tornado touched down 2 miles southwest of the city limits. It was not a large tornado by visual appearance. Its condensation funnel was perhaps 300 yards wide, but the debris cloud beneath it billowed to twice that size. Inside that cloud, winds were estimated at 140 miles per hour. The tornado moved northeast, crossing the Iowa River and then climbing the gentle slope toward the downtown area. Personal accounts from that moment reveal a pattern of disbelief and rapid action. A woman working at a bank on Main Street later told investigators that she saw the sky turn green through the window. She had grown up in Iowa and knew that green sky sometimes preceded tornadoes. She ducked under her desk. The bank had no basement. The building was a 2-story brick structure from the 1920s. She heard the glass break, then felt the floor shake. When she looked up after the noise stopped, she saw daylight through the back wall. The wall had been torn away. Another survivor, a man who lived in a neighborhood near the courthouse, had just pulled into his driveway when his phone alerted. He did not get out of his car. Instead, he drove to a nearby church that had a basement. He later said he could see the tornado coming from the west. It looked like a wide column of dirt and debris. He ran into the church and joined several other people who had already gathered. They huddled in the basement as the building above them groaned. The roof of the church sustained damage, but the basement held. At 4:11 p.m., the tornado struck the Marshall County Courthouse. Inside the building at that time were approximately 20 employees, most of whom had already moved to the interior hallways and stairwells on the lower floors. The courthouse had a basement, but it was used primarily for storage and records. Some employees went there, others did not. The tornado's impact on the building was immediate. The clock tower twisted and collapsed. The roof was torn off in sections. Large chunks of limestone were thrown hundreds of feet. One chunk landed on a car parked 3 blocks away. The building shook violently. The lights went out. The sound was described as a continuous roar, not a series of impacts. When the tornado passed, the employees emerged to find the upper floors gone. The staircase they had used was now open to the sky. They climbed out over debris. No one inside the courthouse was killed. That was attributed to the building's heavy masonry construction, which absorbed much of the force, and to the fact that most people had taken shelter on the lower levels. But the building itself was a total loss. It would take 4 years and $32 million to restore it. At 4:14 p.m., the tornado entered the residential neighborhoods east of downtown. One home on Maple Street was a single-story wood frame house built in the 1950s. Inside was a 67-year-old retired factory worker named Harold. He lived alone. His daughter later said he had a basement but rarely used it because the steps were steep and his knees hurt. When the sirens went off, he moved to the interior bathroom as he had been taught. The bathroom was on the ground floor, not in the basement. The tornado collapsed the house. The bathroom walls caved in. Harold was killed instantly. He was the only fatality. Emergency responders arrived at 4:21 p.m., just 4 minutes after the tornado exited the city. They found Harold's home flattened. Neighbors directed them to the location. It took 30 minutes to locate his body. The coroner later determined that death was caused by blunt force trauma to the head and chest. The autopsy also revealed that he had no other significant injuries. He would have survived if he had been in a basement or a safe room. That single death became the focus of the post-event analysis. The question was not just why he died, but why so few others did. At 4:30 p.m., the Marshalltown Police Department established a command post at the Public Safety Building, which had sustained only minor damage. Officers began a systematic search of damaged structures. The fire department followed, checking for gas leaks and fires. By 5 p.m., the National Guard had been activated. By 6 p.m., a curfew was in effect. The hospital reported 22 injuries, none life-threatening. Most were cuts and bruises from debris. A few were fractures from people falling as they ran for shelter. The investigation into the tornado began the next morning. A team from the National Weather Service in Des Moines, along with meteorologists from the Storm Prediction Center, conducted a damage survey. They used drones to capture aerial imagery and ground teams to measure damage paths and assign intensity ratings. The survey lasted 2 days. The final report classified the tornado as an EF3 with maximum winds of 140 miles per hour. The path length was 18 miles. The maximum width was 400 yards. The The damage was consistent with strong tornadoes, trees debarked, vehicles rolled, structures leveled. But the survey also found anomalies. Some buildings that appeared well built were completely destroyed, while older buildings right next to them were barely damaged. This is common in tornadoes because the wind field is not uniform. Small differences in location, orientation, and construction quality can determine survival. The courthouse, for example, was hit by the most intense part of the vortex. That explained its total destruction. The Orpheum Theater, a few blocks away, was hit by a slightly weaker part of the circulation. Its roof was taken off, but its walls remained. The official report also noted that the warning system functioned as designed. The National Weather Service issued warnings with adequate lead time. The sirens sounded. The mobile alerts went out, yet one person died. That raised questions about the limits of warnings. A warning cannot make a building safe. It cannot force a person to go to a basement. It cannot retrofit an old house. The only way to prevent deaths in tornadoes is to combine warnings with resilient structures. In many parts of the Midwest, that combination does not exist. After the survey, the National Weather Service released a service assessment. It found no systemic failures in forecasting or communication, but it recommended that communities evaluate the effectiveness of their outdoor sirens, especially in areas where sirens are tested weekly and people become desensitized. It also recommended that mobile phone alerts be tested more often for compatibility, but these were modest recommendations. The larger issue, affordable, accessible, safe rooms, remained unaddressed. In the months following the tornado, Marshalltown began its recovery. The Federal Emergency Management Agency opened a disaster recovery center. Temporary housing was provided for displaced families. The City Council passed an emergency ordinance requiring that all new construction in the downtown area include reinforced safe rooms. But the ordinance applied only to new buildings, and most structures in the city were old. The cost of retrofitting existing buildings was estimated at tens of millions of dollars. No funding source was identified. The courthouse restoration became a symbol of the city's resilience. The project took 4 years. The clock tower was rebuilt using original plans. The limestone was sourced from the same quarry that supplied the original stone. The interior was modernized, but the exterior was restored to its 1886 appearance. The building reopened in 2012. The cost exceeded initial estimates by 50%. The Orpheum Theater also reopened after extensive repairs. Its roof was replaced and the interior was upgraded. The theater now serves as a community gathering space and a reminder of the tornado's impact. The human cost was harder to quantify. Harold's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city, alleging that the sirens were not loud enough inside his home. The case was dismissed on the grounds that the city had no duty to ensure that sirens could be heard inside every building. The family accepted the outcome but continued to advocate for better tornado safety education. For the rest of the community, the tornado became a defining event. Schools held drills. Churches organized emergency preparedness workshops. The local newspaper published a special edition with stories from survivors. The phrase 6 minutes entered the local vocabulary. It referred to the duration of the tornado's passage through the city, but it also referred to the speed at which life could change. Why does the Marshalltown tornado still matter? Because it illustrates a fundamental gap in America's tornado safety infrastructure. The warning system is world-class. The forecasts are accurate. The communication networks are extensive, but none of that matters if the person receiving the warning has nowhere safe to go. In Marshalltown, the majority of residents had basements or interior rooms that offered protection, but a significant minority did not. The death of one person does not constitute a catastrophe, but it represents the limit of the current approach. In the years since the tornado, researchers have studied the event to understand why some people survived and others did not. They found that the strongest predictor of survival was not the receipt of the warning, but the presence of a basement or a storm shelter. Those who sheltered in basements had a near-zero fatality rate. Those who sheltered in first-floor interior rooms had a low but significant fatality rate. Those who sheltered in mobile homes or vehicles had the highest risk. The study also found that warning receipt was high, but that many people delayed taking action because they wanted to confirm the threat visually. They looked out windows or went outside. That delay reduced the time available to reach shelter. In a fast-moving tornado, every second matters. The Marshalltown tornado also highlighted the role of demographics. Harold was elderly and had mobility issues. He could not easily navigate the steep basement stairs. That is a common problem for older adults in tornado-prone areas. Many live in older homes without accessible safe rooms. Retrofitting those homes is expensive, and many seniors live on fixed incomes. The solution is not simply better warnings. It is building codes that require safe rooms in all new construction and subsidies for retrofitting existing homes. That is a policy choice, and it has not been widely adopted. The event also raised questions about the alerting ecosystem. The wireless emergency alert system is designed to reach as many people as possible, but it has limitations. The alerts are geographically targeted, but the polygons used for tornado warnings are often large. That means people outside the direct path receive alerts, which can cause complacency over time. The Marshalltown tornado warning covered a large area, including many neighborhoods that were never threatened. Some residents reported that they had become so accustomed to receiving alerts that they ignored them. That is a known problem, but solving it requires more precise warning polygons, which are difficult to generate in real time. Another issue was the reliance on outdoor sirens. Sirens are designed to warn people who are outside. They are not effective inside buildings, especially those with modern insulation and closed windows. In Marshalltown, many residents said they did not hear the sirens until they opened their doors or windows. By then, it was too late. The city has since installed additional sirens in residential areas, but the effectiveness of sirens remains debated. The investigation also looked at the role of social media. The Marshall County Sheriff's Office posted updates on Facebook and Twitter, but the posts were not seen by many residents until after the tornado had passed. Social media can supplement traditional warnings, but it is not a primary alert system. All of these findings feed into a larger conversation about tornado resilience in the United States. The country has the most advanced tornado warning system in the world, but it also has the most tornadoes. The death toll from tornadoes has declined over the past century, but it remains stubbornly high in certain years. The 2018 tornado season was relatively quiet. Marshalltown was one of only 2 EF3 tornadoes in Iowa that year. The death toll was low. That made the event a case study in how even a small tornado can cause outsized damage if it strikes a vulnerable area. The Marshalltown tornado also serves as a reminder that tornadoes are not purely natural disasters. The damage they cause is shaped by human decisions about where to build, and how to warn. The tornado itself was a weather event. The destruction was a result of infrastructure, policy, and behavior. Those factors can be changed, but change is slow. In the years after the tornado, Marshalltown did make some changes. The city updated its emergency operations plan. It conducted tabletop exercises. It partnered with the National Weather Service to improve spotter training. It also applied for and received a grant from FEMA to install safe rooms in a public school and a community center. But the cost of retrofitting private homes remained out of reach for most residents. The city council considered a mandatory safe room ordinance for new construction, but it was opposed by homebuilders on the grounds that it would increase costs. The ordinance never passed. The story of the Marshalltown tornado is not a story of failure. It is a story of a system that works well but not perfectly. The warning system saved countless lives. The emergency response was swift and effective. The community recovered with resilience. But the system also had a blind spot. It could not protect everyone. That blind spot is not unique to Marshalltown. It exists in every community that lies in the path of a tornado. What happened in Marshalltown on July 19, 2018 was a disaster that could have been much worse. The fact that only one person died is a testament to the effectiveness of warnings and the bravery of first responders. But that single death is also a measure of what remains to be done. It is the difference between a system that is good and one that is comprehensive. Until every home has a safe room, until every warning is heard and heeded, that gap will remain. Marshalltown showed what happens when that gap is exposed. The question is whether the lesson will be learned elsewhere. In the next segment, we will examine the personal stories of the recovery. We will follow the lives of individuals who lost their homes and their landmarks. We will see how a community rebuilds after its center is torn apart in minutes. The timeline is set. The scene is established. The questions remain open. The morning after the tornado, the sun rose over a city that no longer looked familiar. At 6 a.m. on July 20, 2018, emergency crews began a systematic search of the debris. The National Weather Service survey teams arrived at dawn, carrying cameras, GPS units, and damage assessment checklists. They would spend the next 6 hours walking through the wreckage, measuring the width of the path, estimating wind speeds from the pattern of fallen trees and collapsed walls. Their findings would confirm what everyone already suspected. The tornado had reached EF3 intensity, with winds estimated between 136 and 165 miles per hour. One of the first places the survey team visited was the neighborhood where Harold had lived. His house was a single-story frame structure built in 1960. The basement stairs were steep, narrow, and had no handrail. The interior room he had taken shelter in was a small bathroom on the main floor. That bathroom had a window. The window was blown inward. The force of the wind had lifted the roof, collapsed the exterior walls, and left the bathroom exposed to the full force of the storm. Harold was found in the bathtub covered in debris. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as blunt force trauma. The time of death was estimated at 4:10 p.m. within the window of the tornado's passage. Harold's daughter, Linda, arrived from Des Moines later that afternoon. She had been at work when she saw the news on television. She tried calling her father. The line was dead. She drove east on Highway 30, passing overturned trucks and flattened billboards. She reached the outskirts of Marshalltown around 5:30 p.m. The police had set up a checkpoint. She identified herself as a family member. An officer escorted her to the address. When she saw the house, she knew. She told the officer her father had always refused to move in with her because he wanted to stay in the home where her mother had died 5 years earlier. The home had been his anchor. Now it was matchsticks. Linda later became an advocate for tornado safety. She testified before the city council, asking for a requirement that all new homes include ground-floor safe rooms. She pointed to her father's case. He had received the warning. He had known what to do. But the place he took shelter was not strong enough. The building code in Marshalltown at the time did not require interior rooms to be reinforced. The code followed the International Residential Code, which only required basic structural bracing. Linda argued that the code should be upgraded to include tornado-safe rooms in all new construction, at least in the central part of the state where tornadoes are most common. The city council listened, but the Home Builders Association pushed back. They said the cost would add $15,000 to the price of a new home. The council tabled the proposal. It never came up for a vote, but Linda's story was not the only one. Across the city, other families were telling similar tales of survival and loss. On East Main Street, a couple named Doug and Sharon had been watching television when the alert came. They had no basement. Their home was a ranch house built on a concrete slab. They retreated to a closet in the hallway. As the tornado passed, the roof lifted and then slammed back down. The closet door blew open. Doug threw himself over Sharon. A piece of lumber struck him in the back. He suffered a fractured vertebra but survived. Sharon escaped with bruises. They spent the night in a shelter set up at the high school. The next morning, they walked back to what was left of their home. The walls were still standing, but the roof was gone. Water from the rain had soaked everything. They salvaged a few photographs and a set of china that had belonged to Doug's mother. Everything else was unsalvageable. Doug later told a reporter that he had never really believed a tornado would hit his house. He had lived in Iowa his whole life. He had been through dozens of warnings. He had seen tornadoes on the horizon, but they always passed by. He said that kind of thinking is common. People become desensitized. The warning system depends on people taking action, but action requires belief. When you have been warned 50 times and nothing happened, the 51st warning feels like noise. That is a psychological factor that no radar can fix. The recovery process began in earnest on July 21st. The city of Marshalltown activated its Emergency Operations Center. The Red Cross and Salvation Army set up feeding stations. Volunteers arrived from surrounding towns with chainsaws, water, and food. The Iowa National Guard deployed a unit to assist with debris removal and traffic control. The Federal Emergency Management Agency opened a field office in the county courthouse, but the scale of the damage was overwhelming. Over 300 structures were damaged or destroyed. The total cost was later estimated at $45 million in insured losses and another $15 million in uninsured losses. The Lennox manufacturing plant alone accounted for nearly half of the insured damage. The plant had been in operation for over a century. It employed about 900 people. After the tornado, the company announced that it would rebuild on site. That decision was crucial for the local economy. Had Lennox moved production elsewhere, Marshalltown might have faced a long economic decline, but the rebuild took time. The plant was not fully operational again until March 2019. In the interim, the company paid its workers a reduced wage and allowed them to work at other facilities in other states. Some workers commuted, others relocated temporarily. The disruption was significant. It highlighted a hidden cost of tornadoes, the interruption of employment. Even when people survive physically, their livelihoods can be derailed for months. The city's historic downtown district also faced a long road to recovery. The Marshall County Courthouse with its iconic copper dome had been severely damaged. The dome itself was twisted. The roof was open to the elements. Inside, water had ruined courtroom furniture, records, and the judge's chambers. The county had to lease office space in a former bank building to continue operations. Cost of restoring the courthouse was initially estimated at $20 million. The county applied for disaster assistance from the state and federal governments. The application was approved, but the process was slow. Contractors had to be hired, materials had to be sourced. The work took 3 years. The courthouse reopened in September 2020. The dome was rebuilt to match the original design, but the cost had risen to $28 million. The difference was covered by local taxes. The Lenig Building and the Orpheum Theater Center were also heavily damaged. The Orpheum, built in 1919, had been a cultural landmark. The tornado tore off its roof and collapsed its rear wall. The stage was buried under bricks and timber. The theater's organ, one of the few remaining Wurlitzer theater organs in Iowa, was destroyed. A fundraising campaign raised over $2 million, but the full restoration cost was $8 million. The theater reopened in 2022 with a reduced capacity. The organ was replaced with a digital system. The Lenig Building, which had housed several small businesses, was deemed structurally unsound. It was demolished in 2010. The lot remains vacant. The human toll extended beyond material loss. In the months after the tornado, mental health providers reported an increase in anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The local hospital, Unity Point Health Marshalltown, set up a crisis counseling line. The calls were steady. Many callers reported difficulty sleeping, nightmares about the storm, and a persistent sense of unease when the sky turned gray. Some survivors could not bring themselves to repair their basements. Others refused to let their children sleep alone. The psychological effects of a tornado can last for years. A study published in 2021 tracked survivors of multiple tornadoes in the Midwest. It found that about 30% of those who experienced a direct hit met the criteria for PTSD after 1 year. The rates declined over time, but they remained elevated compared to the general population. For children, the effects were especially pronounced. Marshalltown's public schools lost several days of classes. When they reopened, school counselors conducted group sessions. Teachers were trained to recognize signs of trauma. The school district also revised its tornado drill protocol. Previously, drills involved students moving to interior hallways and crouching. After the tornado, the district began practicing with actual shelter-in-place procedures, including the use of helmets and blankets. The drills were conducted unannounced, in coordination with the National Weather Service. The goal was to prevent the complacency that Doug had described. Community groups also stepped in. A nonprofit called Rebuild Marshalltown formed within weeks of the tornado. It raised funds for families who were underinsured or uninsured. It provided free labor for debris removal. It also coordinated a long-term recovery committee that met monthly for 3 years. One of the committee's biggest challenges was helping seniors who had lost their homes and did not have the financial resources to rebuild. Many seniors owned their homes outright but had no savings for major repairs. The committee connected them with low-interest loans from the USDA and FEMA, but the loans had to be repaid. Some seniors chose to sell their lots and move into rental apartments. The decision was heartbreaking for some, but it was practical. The committee also grappled with the question of whether to rebuild in the same locations. The tornado's path had been a narrow band. The same street that was flattened on the east side was untouched a block away. The question of land use is rarely discussed in the aftermath of tornadoes, but it deserves attention. In some states, communities have adopted land use policies that discourage rebuilding in high-risk areas. They offer buyouts to homeowners. They convert the open land to parks or green space. That approach reduces future vulnerability, but it also requires money and political will. In Marshalltown, no buyouts were offered. The city council decided that rebuilding was the priority. The existing street grid and infrastructure were already in place. To abandon whole blocks would have required a master plan that had not been developed, so the houses went up again. Some were built to the same standards as before. A few were upgraded with safe rooms, but those were the exceptions. The question of building codes remains a divisive issue in tornado-prone America. The International Residential Code does not require tornado-safe rooms. It only requires that rooms designed as safe rooms meet Federal Emergency Management Agency standards. But a homeowner must choose to include a safe room. That choice often depends on cost and perceived risk. In Marshalltown, after the tornado, a survey found that only 12% of homeowners who rebuilt added a safe room. The rest said they could not afford it or did not think it was necessary. The cost of adding a safe room to a new home was estimated at between $8,000 and $15,000. For an existing home, retrofitting was even more expensive, sometimes exceeding $20,000. Without subsidies, these costs are prohibitive for many families. The National Weather Service continues to refine its tornado warning system. In 2019, it introduced a new impact-based warning format that includes more specific damage descriptions. The goal is to convey urgency, but the format change alone cannot solve the fundamental problem of shelter availability. The Marshalltown tornado demonstrated that even a well-warned population is vulnerable if the housing stock is not resilient. There is also a rural dimension to this story. Outside Marshalltown city limits, the tornado also struck several farmsteads. One farm lost its grain bins, machine shed, and part of its house. The family sheltered in a root cellar. They survived. Their crops were not yet harvested. The insurance settlement covered the structure but not the loss of stored grain. The farmer later said that farming is always a gamble, but the tornado was a new kind of gamble he had not prepared for. He considered building a concrete storm shelter. He priced it out. It was $40,000. He decided to wait. Many farmers in the Midwest make the same calculation. They weigh the cost against the probability. The probability is low, but when it happens, the cost of not having shelter can be fatal. By the fall of 2018, the immediate relief phase was over. The debris was cleared, the roads were repaired, the power was restored. The city began to shift from response to long-term recovery. The Marshalltown Area Chamber of Commerce launched a campaign called Marshalltown Strong. It featured banners, t-shirts, and a website. The campaign was designed to boost morale and attract visitors. It worked to some extent, but the underlying economic damage was still being felt. Property values in the affected neighborhoods dropped. Some businesses never reopened. The downtown district lost several storefronts permanently. The tornado also affected the city's tax base. The assessed value of damaged properties declined. That meant less revenue for schools, roads, and public safety. The city had to cut its budget for the following fiscal year. It delayed road repaving and deferred maintenance on city buildings. The state provided some assistance, but it was not enough to cover the gap. The city's mayor at the time, John L.K. Thompson, was a retired teacher. He had been in office for 2 years when the tornado hit. He later said that the disaster was the hardest challenge he had ever faced. He had to balance compassion with fiscal reality. He had to say no to some requests because the city simply did not have the money. He described those conversations as heartbreaking. One of the most contentious issues was the decision to increase property taxes to pay for the courthouse restoration. The County Board of Supervisors voted to raise the levy by 5% for 5 years. The increase was modest, but it added about $60 per year for the average homeowner. Some residents argued that the state should have paid for the entire restoration. Others argued that the county should have let the courthouse be demolished and built a cheaper, modern structure. The board defended the restoration on historic preservation grounds. The courthouse was on the National Register of Historic Places. To demolish it would have been a loss of heritage. The increase passed. As the years passed, Marshalltown slowly returned to something like normal. New businesses opened in old locations. The downtown district began to fill again. The Lenox plant expanded and added a second shift. The population, which had been declining slowly for a decade, stabilized. The tornado had not driven people away. In fact, some families who had been considering a move decided to stay because they felt a renewed connection to the community. But the memory of the event never faded. Every July 19th, the city holds a moment of silence at 4:06 p.m., the time of the first confirmed touchdown. The local newspaper runs a commemorative section, and the questions remain. Could Harold have been saved if the building code had required interior safe rooms? Could the sirens have been placed differently? Could the wireless emergency alert have been sent earlier? The answers are speculative. But they point to a persistent gap between the technology of warning and the reality of human behavior and building stock. The National Weather Service continues to research ways to improve lead times. The average lead time for tornado warnings in 2018 was 13 minutes. That is adequate for a determined person with a safe room. But for those who delay or do not have a safe room, 13 minutes can be too short. The Marshalltown tornado underscores the need for a broader approach, one that combines better warnings with better shelters and better public education about the need to act immediately. In the next part of this story, we will examine how the Marshalltown tornado influenced policy beyond the city limits. We will look at changes in state building codes, federal disaster assistance reform, and the ongoing debate over tornado-safe rooms in schools. The event on July 19, 2018 was not just a local tragedy. It became a data point in a national conversation about how to live safely in the heart of Tornado Alley. In the months following the tornado, state legislators in Iowa began to examine the building code issue more closely. On September 12, 2018, the Iowa Department of Public Safety convened a working group to study tornado shelter requirements. The group included emergency managers, homebuilders, insurance representatives, and survivor advocates. They met in Des Moines. Their first meeting lasted 3 hours. The discussion was contentious. Homebuilders argued that mandating safe rooms would increase housing costs and slow construction. Survivors argued that cost meant little if people died. The working group produced a report in December 2018. It recommended voluntary guidelines but stopped short of requiring safe rooms in new residential construction. The report cited cost concerns and the difficulty of retrofitting existing homes. It also noted that most tornado deaths occur in mobile homes, not permanent structures. But Marshalltown had few mobile homes. The deaths were in single-family houses. At the federal level, the Federal Emergency Management Agency reviewed its disaster assistance programs in light of the Marshalltown tornado. FEMA had provided grants for temporary housing and repairs, but those grants did not include funds for safe rooms. The agency's hazard mitigation grant program could fund safe rooms, but only as part of a broader mitigation plan submitted by the state. Iowa submitted such a plan in early 2019. It requested funding for safe rooms in schools and public buildings. It did not request funding for private residences. The state argued that public shelters were more cost-effective. The application was approved in part, and by 2020 several schools in tornado-prone counties had received grants to build underground shelters, but the vast majority of homes remained unprotected. The question of safe rooms in schools became particularly urgent after Marshalltown. The city's high school had not been hit directly, but several elementary schools were in the path. Children had been evacuated to hallways and bathrooms. No one was hurt, but the close call prompted a school board review. In October 2018, the board voted to include a safe room in the planned renovation of the middle school. The project was funded by a bond measure passed by voters. The safe room cost $400,000 and could hold 700 people. It was completed in 2010. It was one of the first school safe rooms in Marshall County. The superintendent later said that the safe room was not just for students, it could serve the surrounding neighborhood during future tornadoes. But elsewhere in Iowa, school districts faced harder choices. The state provided no dedicated funding for school safe rooms. Districts had to rely on local bonds, grants, or donations. Many rural districts could not afford the cost. A 2019 survey by the Iowa Association of School Boards found that only 12% of school buildings in the state had a designated tornado safe room. The majority relied on interior hallways and basements. Basements are common in older schools but absent in newer ones. Modern school design often favors open floor plans and large windows. Those designs are less tornado-resistant. The Marshalltown tornado also prompted changes in the wireless emergency alert system. The National Weather Service issued a post-event review that identified several delays in the alert process. The system was supposed to send alerts automatically when a tornado warning was issued. But in Marshalltown, the alert was delayed by approximately 3 minutes due to a software routing issue. The fix was implemented by October 2018. The National Weather Service also updated its training for warning coordination meteorologists to emphasize the importance of activating the alert system immediately without waiting for confirmation from spotters. But the deeper problem remained. Many people did not have a place to go even if the warning came in time. The 2019 Atlantic hurricane season drove the point home. Hurricane Michael had devastated parts of the Florida Panhandle, and the National Hurricane Center's forecasts were precise. But people died because they could not evacuate or had no strong shelter. The parallel to tornadoes was clear. Warning technology was advancing, but the physical infrastructure of homes and communities was not keeping pace. In 2020, the National Institute of Standards and Technology launched a study on tornado impacts in Marshalltown. The study used high-resolution aerial imagery, building permit data, and insurance claims to map the relationship between building age, construction type, and damage level. Preliminary findings were released in 2020. They confirmed that older homes with brick or block construction suffered less damage than wood frame houses, but wood frame houses were more common in the moderate-income neighborhoods hit hardest. The study also found that homes built after the 1990s performed better in terms of roof attachment and window resistance, but no home was designed to withstand an EF3 tornado without a safe room. The personal stories from Marshalltown continued to surface in local media. A couple who had lost their home rebuilt with a safe room. The wife said the sound of the tornado still haunted her. She kept a weather radio on the kitchen counter. Whenever a storm warning was issued, she and her husband went to the safe room even if the threat was far south. Her husband said it was the price of peace of mind. A family with 3 children had not rebuilt. They had moved to a suburb of Des Moines. The father said the memory of the house collapsing around them was too strong. He said he never wanted to see Marshalltown again. The children had nightmares for months. The family's house was eventually bought by a developer and demolished. The lot remained empty. The recovery of Marshalltown's economy took years. By 2021, downtown occupancy had returned to pre-tornado levels, but the mix of businesses had changed. 2 restaurants had closed permanently, a clothing store had reopened but downsized, a pharmacy had rebuilt and expanded. The Downtown Association reported that foot traffic was still below 2017 levels. The courthouse restoration was completed in 2020. The Copper Dome was rebuilt exactly as it had been, using historical photographs. The restoration cost $3 million. The scaffolding came down in April 2020. The building was rededicated on a rainy Saturday. The mayor spoke. A crowd of several hundred attended. They clapped when the dome gleamed in a break of sunlight. The state legislature revisited the issue of tornado safety in 2003. A bill was introduced to require all new school construction to include a tornado safe room funded by a state grant program. The bill passed the House but failed in the Senate. Opponents cited the cost and the low probability of a direct hit. They argued that the money would be better spent on academic programs. The bill's sponsor, a representative from a rural district, said that probability meant nothing when the tornado came. He pointed to Marshalltown. He pointed to the children who had huddled in hallways. He said that the state had a responsibility. The bill died in committee. As of 2025, Marshalltown has not experienced another tornado. The city has grown slightly, adding about 200 residents. The Lenox plant remains the largest employer. The downtown has a new coffee shop and a brewery. The nights are quiet, but the sirens are tested every first Saturday of the month. The safe room at the middle school is used occasionally for storage. Some residents keep a weather radio on their nightstand, others have forgotten. The questions that began on July 19, 2018 have no easy answers. What happened in Marshalltown was not a failure of warnings. The National Weather Service issued a timely alert. the sirens sounded. People knew the storm was coming. What failed was the shelter. The homes were not built for the force they faced. The building codes did not require them to be. The cost of a safe room was too high for most families. The insurance payout was not enough to cover one. The city had no safe room program. The state had no mandate. The federal government had no policy. The Marshalltown tornado was a disaster of infrastructure, not information, and until the infrastructure changes, the same story will repeat in Joplin, in Moore, in Mayfield, in Rolling Fork. The same pattern, a warning issued, people scared, no place to go, the tornado arrives, the houses fall, the sirens are test, the safe rooms are empty. The memorials fade, and the next spring the clouds build again, the memorials fade, and the next spring the clouds build again. But for the people of Marshalltown, the question of what happened on July 19, 2018 does not fade. It sits underneath the rebuilt roofs and the repainted walls. It surfaces in town hall meetings, in insurance adjuster reports, in the quiet conversations between neighbors who still cross the street to avoid the empty lots. In the years following the tornado, the National Institute of Standards and Technology continued its study. The final report was published in March 2023, nearly 5 years after the event. It ran more than 200 pages. The report concluded that the primary factor determining whether a home survived or collapsed was not the roof shape or the number of windows. It was the quality of the connection between the roof trusses and the walls. Homes built before 1970 often used toe-nailed nails, simple nail joints that could not resist uplift. Homes built after 1990 typically used metal hurricane clips or straps. Those with clips fared better, but even they failed when the tornado's winds exceeded 150 miles per hour. The report also documented the role of manufactured homes. Marshall County had about 200 manufactured homes in Tuesiruniite. 17 were destroyed. 6 were damaged beyond repair. Manufactured homes are not built to withstand tornado winds. The Federal Code for Manufactured Housing, HUD Code 3280, requires wind resistance only up to 100 miles per hour in most of the country. In Iowa, the requirement was even lower. The report recommended that HUD update the wind resistance standards for manufactured homes in tornado-prone regions. As of 2025, no update has been made. How could this have happened? The question has been asked in multiple forums. In 2022, the Iowa State Legislature held a public hearing on building codes. Marshalltown's mayor testified. He described the damage to the courthouse, the Lennox plant, the homes. He said that the city had voluntarily adopted the 2015 International Residential Code in 2007, but that code did not require tornado-resistant design. It only addressed wind speeds up to 90 miles per hour in central Iowa. The tornado's winds were nearly double that. The mayor said that Iowa's building code system was a patchwork. Some cities adopted modern codes, others used codes from the 198 still others had no code at all. He recommended a statewide code that included a basic wind resistance standard for all new homes. The hearing ended without a vote. The National Weather Service also revisited its role. The 3-minute delay in the wireless emergency alert was traced to a configuration error in the software that routed the warning to cell towers. The error was fixed within weeks. But the broader problem of alert fatigue remained. In Marshall County, the tornado sirens had been activated correctly, but many residents said they did not hear them because they were in basements or because the wind was already howling. Some said they received the wireless alert on their phones only after the tornado had passed. One woman told a local newspaper that she got the alert when she was already standing in the rubble of her home. The National Weather Service acknowledged that the system was not perfect. It emphasized that no single alert method was reliable. People needed multiple layers, sirens, radio, television, phone alerts. But multiple layers required multiple devices, multiple batteries, multiple habits. Not everyone had them. The human cost of that imbalance is difficult to measure. The official death toll remained 0, but the unofficial toll was higher. A woman in her 60s died of a heart attack during the tornado. Her family said she had been terrified by the sound. The death was not included in the tornado statistics. Several people required hospitalization for stress-related conditions. A survey conducted by the University of Iowa in 2019 found that 30% of Marshalltown residents reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder 1 year after the tornado. The rate was highest among those whose homes had been destroyed. Children under 12 showed elevated rates of anxiety. The school district hired 2 additional counselors. The demand remained high through 2022. In 2023, the Marshalltown Community Foundation launched a mental health initiative called Rebuild Inside. It provided free therapy sessions for any resident affected by the tornado. The program was funded by a grant from the Iowa Department of Human Services. By mid-2024, more than 600 people had used the service. The foundation's director said that the tornado had not only destroyed buildings, it had destroyed a sense of safety. People who had never locked their doors before now checked the weather every morning. Some could not sleep during thunderstorms. A local pastor said that the congregation had shrunk after the tornado, not because people moved away, but because they could not stand to hear the roof creak during a storm. The tornado also reshaped the way the city thought about emergency planning. In 2021, Marshalltown hired its first full-time emergency management director. The previous system relied on volunteer coordinators. The new director developed a comprehensive hazard mitigation plan. The plan identified the neighborhood south of the courthouse as the most vulnerable. It recommended a dense cluster of safe rooms, one every few blocks. The city applied for a FEMA grant to build 3 community safe rooms. The application was approved in Tuziratwatwo. The safe rooms were built in Tuziratwafer. Each could hold 200 people. They were located in parks and near a senior center. They were designed to double as community meeting spaces. The total cost was $1.2 million. The city contributed $300,000 from its general fund, but the safe rooms were limited. They covered only a small portion of the city. Many residents still had no access. The city could not mandate safe rooms in private homes. The cost remained prohibitive. A single-family safe room cost between $3,000 and $8,000 depending on size. That was more than most households could afford. The city explored a subsidy program. It required a dedicated revenue source. None was found. In 2024, the Iowa Climate Statement was released. It was signed by more than 200 scientists from Iowa colleges and universities. The statement noted that the frequency of strong tornadoes in the state had increased over the past 40 years. It cited research showing that a warming climate was shifting the tornado alley eastward into more densely populated areas of the Midwest. The statement recommended that Iowa adopt a statewide building code that included tornado-resistant standards. It also recommended expanding the network of community safe rooms, especially in mobile home parks. The state legislature did not take action. Marshalltown's story was not unique. The same questions were asked in Joplin, in Moore, in Mayfield. In each case, the tornado had exposed a gap between the technology of prediction and the infrastructure of protection. The warnings had improved, the buildings had not. The costs of upgrading were high, the political will was low. The cycle continued. On July 19, 2024, the 6th anniversary of the tornado, the city held a small ceremony at the courthouse. The mayor spoke. The names of the volunteer responders were read. A local choir sang, "The sky was clear." After the ceremony, a reporter asked the mayor what he would say to someone who asked whether Marshalltown was safer now than it was in Tuziaruniite. The mayor paused. He said that the sirens were tested monthly. The wireless alerts were now instant. The school had a safe room. The city had 3 new community safe rooms. The emergency management director had a full-time staff. The building code had been updated to require hurricane clips on all new roofs. The city had applied for a grant to retrofit older homes with roof anchors. The grant had not been approved. He said that the city was safer but not safe. He said that a tornado of that strength would still level many homes. He said that the only true protection was a safe room. And that many people still did not have one. The reporter asked whether he thought the city would ever be truly safe. The mayor looked at the courthouse dome, gleaming in the afternoon sun. He said that safety was not a destination, it was a process. He said that the city would keep applying for grants, keep updating codes, keep testing the sirens. He said that the clouds would build again and the city would be ready. But he did not say that the city would be safe. He knew that some things could not be guaranteed. He thanked the reporter. He walked back into the courthouse. The ceremony ended. The crowd dispersed. The dome cast a long shadow across the lawn. The question of what happened in Marshalltown is still being answered. Investigators found the failures. Policymakers debated the fixes. Some were implemented, others were not. The stories of the people who lived through it continue to shape the town's identity. The tornado did not break Marshalltown, but it changed it. The change is visible in every new building, every safe room, every survivor who still sleeps with a weather radio by the bed. The change is also visible in the empty lots, the uninsured homes, the families who left and never came back. And the clouds build again. That is the nature of the place. The planes will produce storms, the warnings will be issued, the sirens will sound. The question is not whether the tornado will come again. It is whether the people will be ready. The answer is not simple. It is written in budgets, building codes, and the decisions made in quiet rooms. The answer is still being written. Marshalltown is a footnote in the history of tornado disasters, but it is also a mirror. It shows what happens when warnings are accurate but shelters are absent. It shows what happens when infrastructure lags behind information. It shows that the cost of safety is high, but the cost of unpreparedness is higher. The sun sets over the rebuilt courthouse. The safe rooms are empty, the sirens are silent, and next spring the clouds will build again.